Hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven. Our guest today is Reena Friedman Watts. She started as a producer, get this, for The Jerry Springer Show, and she's never looked back. She is really hooked on telling the stories of outsiders. She does that through a podcast called The Better Call Daddy Show. So I'll ask Reena a little bit about that. But she is a media marketing specialist. She has a company called Mega Watts Productions. She likes to help entrepreneurs get seen. So before I tell the audience a little bit more about you, Reena, thank you for being here. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to the episode together with you because, like I mentioned, starting with the Jerry Springer Show and then moving on, the list of shows Reena has been part of as a producer. That list is long. It includes shows like Nanny 911, Judge Alex, Divorce Court. Like, you'd rather be a producer on these shows than to be a guest, right?
Definitely. Although some of my family could probably star in some of the shows that I've worked on.
each one a different show. I bet you have a matching. I won't ask you to spell it out, but.
I honestly think that's why I got along so well at Springer, is because I grew up in Kentucky and the stories were not that far-fetched from things that I heard.
Oh, wow. And so it'll be interesting to pick your brain a little bit about that experience. But again, Reena's hosting a podcast called The Better Call Daddy Show. And I'll ask Reena more about this later, but her dad is featured as a part of this. So you can find it wherever you're listening to this podcast, or you can go to bettercalldaddy.com. And Reena's also producing a new podcast. It's healthcare related, called The Sniff Spotlight. And sniff in this instance means, I should have known this, but I had a brain cramp a couple minutes ago. Sniff means?
Skilled nursing facility. So it's a nursing home podcast where we are highlighting healthcare heroes, owners and operators, directors of rehabilitation, activities coordinators, maintenance workers, all of the people that go into taking care of the senior community.
Yeah, well, and it's been a particularly tough year for people in those settings, so it's great to give them some recognition, and yeah, they are heroes, I agree.
So yeah, it's been a heartwarming experience so far, and really eye-opening just to all of the changes and regulations and people working doubles and, having to stay separate sometimes even from their own families to take care of the lives of others.
Yeah, so thank you for highlighting, and I hope people will go find that as well. I'm going to tell, I know a lot of people in healthcare, so I'm going to spread the word about that as well.
Thank you.
So Reena, as you know, there's so much we can talk about here today, but as we normally do, I guess we'll kind of jump right into asking you to tell a story. What would you say is your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake I learned pretty early on, and it was, don't try to make people what they're not. And, I started at the Jerry Springer Show as an intern, where I was taking the guests around Chicago, and I was actually new to the city as well. So it was great. I got petty cash. I got a pager. They said, take them out on the town. I had vouchers to different restaurants, the House of Blues. I was learning the city alongside them. Then I started booking the guests. Mm-hmm. I kind of knew what kind of guests they wanted for the show. And I heard the associate producers on the phone, and I started imitating them and trying to see if I could get people to come to Chicago. And, it's like when one show goes well, you're like, okay, rinse, recycle, repeat, right? But that's not necessarily true. Like, everybody tells their story in their own unique way, and that's what makes their story beautiful. And what I tried to do is, like, once I had one good story and the crowd was going wild, I tried to make people that weren't like that just like my previous guests. So I had one guest, I think it was like the previous show, and she was like taking off her clothes and yelling at the crowd, and she was very boisterous and just confident. And then the week after, I had this guest, I think that was like having a relationship with like her half brother, and I tried to make her like the previous guest. The thing is that she wasn't like that at all. She was kind of weird and she was very quiet and she told her story in a much different way. And I was like, people are going to go after you. Like, it's not something that you hear every day, what you're doing. Like, the crowd is going to boo you. They're going to think that's weird. And you have to go after them. I'm like, that's what this show is. And she could not do that. It did not come across as authentic at all. It was like not who she was. And so I tried to make her do that. And when you try to make people fake who they are, you can sense that. It's very strained. It's not received well. She doesn't feel good about it. The crowd doesn't feel good about it. The executives don't feel good about it. And I learned a very good mistake in that situation.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I'm curious what kind of pressure you were under. Like, did the show and the search for ratings, did it get addicted to the conflict? And were you under pressure
like
to
when
bring
you're
that?
young? Yeah, it's like when you're young and you're measuring like what a good show is based upon the audience's reaction. When you get a reaction from one story, you try to get that same reaction from your next story. Like, I was learning as I went. So I didn't realize by literally just having her say it in her own unique, relaxed fashion, like she did on the phone, that could have been better or enough to build up to a great reaction. Like, not every reaction is going to be hysterics and laughter and screaming from the crowd. Sometimes you can create shock or confusion or different emotions. And that makes a beautiful story too. And that took me a little while to learn, because like when I got the big reactions, that's like an addicting feeling. And you get the kudos from everyone around you because they're like, whoa, how did you find that?
So I was going to ask as a follow-up question before we get to lessons learned about that you've applied in other places. Where did you find these people? Did they not self-nominate? They called in and said, hey, listen to this?
That was during the days of 1-800-96-JERRY. I worked there at the very beginning of finding guests on the internet. I'm sure the majority of guests are now found that way. I mean, even for my own podcast now, I go into a Clubhouse room, I hear somebody pour their heart out, and I'm like, message them like, can you do that again for me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and there's different ways of finding the news stories through, So, and especially I bet going from internet then to social media probably explodes the
possibilities.
The possibilities for those stories and those over the top people. It's not just the story of the situation, it's the way they were, I guess, or the way they
Another
acted.
mistake that I learned there that's along the same lines is I had this guy who wanted to win his ex-girlfriend back. And he was so likable and you loved him and you actually felt sorry for him. Like, they were in a relationship for years and she left him for a biker tough guy. And he was like the sensitive guy and skinny and, you know, much smaller. And how he was coming here to win her back. And I told the biker boyfriend that before he knocks the guy out of the chair, he has to explain why he's upset with the other guy. It is a talk show. You can't just go out there and knock him out of the chair. That's like an unairable segment. You know what I mean? Like, people aren't going to understand where that comes from.
Right.
And he promised me he was not going to go out there and KO the guy. But sometimes people's behavior is erratic and unpredictable. And I'm 21 years old, 22 years old, dealing with people that are unpredictable. And he went right out on the stage and knocked that guy out with no explanation, no talking. It was an unairable segment.
So I was going to ask, because in that situation or other times where the guest was maybe too sedate or too nervous, I mean, how many segments or shows ended up just not being aired?
That was actually, thank God, my only one of those. I learned very quickly not to do that again.
Yeah. So but you tried coaching him up to what you needed or what you wanted, but I mean, you couldn't tell that maybe he just snapped.
I
You saw
knew
the
he
guy,
would.
right?
The thing is right. You go
Yeah.
out there, there's a crowd, there's excitement, there's lights, there's anger. This guy has been bothering his girlfriend for months. Sometimes you say you're going to do one thing and your body does another.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you want to say something nice to your kid and then you want things to be more diplomatic and it
Yeah.
comes out wrong because you're angry.
Yeah. One other quick follow-up question. Was there ever a time where you felt unsafe because of a guest or the dynamics or the fighting?
Yeah, there is one instance that sticks out. There were these two girls from LA and they were much bigger than me and a little older than me, and they had prior altercations with each other back in their hometowns. It was a sister who hated her brother's wife. And they literally had thrown down multiple times in LA, East LA. They were pretty rough.
Mm-hmm.
And in between commercial breaks, we had separated them. And after I had separated them, went the same direction that one had exited the stage. I think she was expecting me to come from the other side of the stage to talk to her. So I think she thought I was the sister-in-law, but she had her fist clocked back. And I just jumped back, put my hands in the air, and was like, I'm not her. Here's what you forgot to say. You need to calm down. We got to regroup. Let me fix your hair. And I was scared. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I'm glad you got out of that. But then as you worked, you continue to work on Springer, you worked on other shows. Were you able to apply that lesson intentionally from your first story about not trying to encourage a guest to be something or somebody that they're not? Was that useful on other shows? Has that been useful on your podcast, Better Call Daddy?
Yeah, I think that as I matured as an interviewer and as I matured as like an associate producer or producer, I tried to be more situationally aware.
Mm-hmm.
I did still make other mistakes. Like I worked on this one show called Kill Reality, and it was a bunch of reality stars living in a house together, and then they had the opportunity to star in like a B movie. So we filmed them all living together, and then we filmed the making of a movie, and it was definitely a B movie.
What was the name of that? Was that released then, or was it just an exercise
I forgot
for
the name
show?
of the movie part, but the show was called Kill Reality.
Kill Reality. And this is the funny thing where then somebody who's been on one of the reality shows continues, like they're famous for being a reality star.
Right. So it was like people from Survivor and Real World and Apprentice, and they all had their, opportunity to star in this movie, and they lived in a house together. And of course, the drama really happens in the house. Yeah. So I remember there was some like sort of big reveal getting ready to happen. Like they were bringing some unexpected guest to the house or something. And I was in there a little bit too long. Where like they came through the door with the camera people and the staff is not supposed to be in the house. And I was like, like another one of those moments where like,
Yeah.
So I still remember that to this day because I felt like I messed up like a big reveal, and it wasn't on purpose. I just didn't get out quick enough. And so, yeah.
Well, that wasn't a fireable offense, though.
That wasn't a fireable offense. Thank goodness, there is the magic of editing and things like that. But, yeah, you learn from these things. You really have to, like, be aware of your surroundings and timing and storytelling and what's happening as a bigger picture. As far as, my own podcast and what I've learned, I was talking to somebody about this today. One thing that I do, because I have a lot to say, is when a guest is telling me a story, like a lot of times I'll put myself on mute until they're done. So I don't interrupt them.
Yeah. Well, let me see what my listeners think about this. So, there are times where, I have these reactions. Sometimes I'll try to go and edit those out. There are probably times though where I need to be better about jumping in and interrupting. I don't know if now we're just kind of talking podcaster to podcaster here. People can listen in. Some guests will talk it seems like forever, like they're giving a monologue. And there are times when I reflect where I'm like, I probably need to be more aggressive sometimes and just jump in. I don't know. Is that part of so I'm trying to mature and get better as an interviewer. How do you handle that?
I literally had a guest that talked almost the entire hour, and I had like a podcast scheduled after. I think I might have asked like 2 follow-up questions. Yeah. I had to do a follow-up interview with him in order to even air the segment. Like I was like, I loved your story. I know you had a lot to say. We're going to have to do a part 2.
Yeah. And not use that first part. Basically like a redo, you mean? Or
not a redo, because I did end up piecing the 2 together. But like I had so many questions I wanted to ask him, and there was no moment to break it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess sometimes depending on the story or the role they're on, it would. You have some guests who tell some fairly personal stories, like the work. I'm getting mostly workplace stories. You're getting a different type of story and guest.
Yeah, so sometimes when you go deep with people that have had trauma and you're like on the brink of some good emotion, like you can't break that.
Yeah, yeah. So my podcasting mistakes, anyway. I want to go back though, and I still just find this really fascinating. I'm going off of memories now of. I'll admit to it. Everyone watched Springer. I guess not everybody admits it, but I'm curious if there were mistakes, or you wonder sometimes, like, all right, is this a real story, or how much are they making up a story because they know they can come get on TV and get taken around town, as you were describing? Like, were there ever times where you tried to flesh out, like, okay, is this legit? And maybe you have doubts, but it sounds like good TV. Like, I'm just curious.
I had one story that I'm not going to lie, and now that the show's over, probably so is my NDA. But there was a story that was so well rehearsed. Like literally they had all the parties play along. Like, I called them at different locations and I tried to bust them out. They were so well rehearsed. Not only did they fool me, but they fooled other people on my team. They were good. And we brought them. And then there was something that I was like, hey, when was the last time you slept with him? And one person said 3 days ago. The other one was like a couple months ago. I was like, oh my God, dude, they're totally lying.
It's falling apart. Yeah.
It's falling apart. I was like, if you don't go out there and pull that off, you are walking home. Yeah. I was like, but that was the only time. That only happened to me once. I'm sure it happened to other producers though. I was like, you said that she was screwing your boyfriend. I'm like, if you don't go rip her hair out, I'm like, you better go after her. You know what I mean? I was like, I was so mad that I got played.
Yeah. Did they pull it? Well, then how did that, did they pull it off? But the thing
is like the security guards, they stop it from happening, and like, no one's really going to get hurt. But I was like, you really had me going on the phone, and you guys really rehearsed this to pull that over on me. I was like, I better be able to believe that from backstage. And they did, man. They got the message. They got the message. I felt bad too. I was like, they got to go home together.
Yeah. Did they cop to it, or were they kind of evasive with you, or did they say, okay, yeah, you caught us?
I didn't give them all a scare. But the one that I caught, you know what I mean? So I didn't tell even the other 3 that I knew. Yeah. I wanted them to keep trying to play it off. The one that messed up, I let her know. I was like, you're going to be the ringleader here. You're going to hold this story together.
Yeah.
I think it might have even been better that not all of them knew that they still needed to pull it off.
Wow. So we want to talk about your podcast, but I'm curious, how you've kind of built upon these different experiences you've had in television production of different, I guess there are different sub-formats within reality shows and television. Your company, Megawatts Productions, beyond the podcast, what types of marketing work have you been doing?
One project that I really enjoyed was a best-selling author on LinkedIn reached out to me, and she was getting ready to come out with a couple other books, one being her first children's book, and another one was like in the self-help genre. And in order for her to up-level her marketing game, she wanted to try to get endorsements from some bigger people. And I love that kind of work. I love that kind of challenge. And I did get a few no's, but I got some yeses that were amazing. And so she hired me to get her like 5 endorsements. And she had such a list of people that she wanted. I ended up getting her 7. And that was very exciting. And she did hit #1 on Amazon, like in the first week that the book came out. And I was like, wow, like look at the power of endorsements. That was so exciting. And I really felt like, too, that she saw that strength in me and was able to help me max that out. And then when it went so well with the first book, she was like, hey, let's try it in the kids' genre, too. And so actually one of the guys who was on my podcast was someone who endorsed her children's book. And I had never even heard of him, but he was like big in that genre. And somebody that she was excited to reach out to. And then I was like, hey, you know, a way that I could thank you would be to have you tell your story on my podcast. So I feel like by having a platform like a podcast, it helps in business because it's a great way to thank someone or to network or to build a community. Like I have other publicists like sending me people now like, hey, you know, this client I feel like would be great for your show. It's by having a platform, it's, you know, scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Like, it's been great for that.
Well, good. And a little bit back to inside podcast baseball. Again, as I say, inside baseball. I don't know why that's the expression, but podcast talk. I had a PR person tell me, or I was actually a guest who was set up by a PR agency. This is a woman who's appeared as a commentator on all the financial networks on TV. And I said, oh, well, you know, thank you for being on my little podcast. And she said, well, you know what? My publicist told me through the publisher, going on TV does not sell books. Going on podcasts sells books. So I'm like, all right, well, good. Hooray for that.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Because we build communities. I think that's what it is.
Yeah. And I think there's a deeper connection. You know, not that people are always putting the earbuds in, but somehow I think getting that podcast and that guest pumped directly into your ears as opposed to more passive TV watching, maybe that's part of it too.
Do you think that Clubhouse is going to take away from that?
Oh, I have no idea. I've done Clubhouse once as a listener and once in a room the other day. Do you think Clubhouse will take away from podcasting? I don't know. It's too. It feels like the early days of Twitter, where people were still trying to figure out what Twitter was, if that's been figured out. What do you think? Or
I feel like people are building a quick following on there, and people are liking sharing their intimate stories with strangers, which I think that is really interesting.
And it's not being recorded, so that probably that creates a different. It's like a party line.
A party line, a safe space, a venting platform, a place to get feedback.
So, I mean, Twitter didn't kill Facebook. And so I'm sure Clubhouse maybe just coexists. It's different. Maybe it's just different than podcasts.
I have found some amazing guests off Clubhouse now. I just interviewed a guy who was in the military at Gitmo for 4 years. And he started questioning his faith upon connecting with the prisoners.
Wow.
What a story. So he went from like questioning his Christian roots to getting a Hebrew tattoo of the word chesed on his arm, which means kindness. And leaving the military, and he's now in theater at Yale.
Oh, that's quite the change.
Yeah, wow. I found that one on Clubhouse. I listened to another girl the other day who had been locked in her basement for years by her stepmother, and now she's become like an audiologist, and she helps children who have like, processing information disorders from trauma, and she helps them be able to communicate better. I found that. I mean, there's so many different rooms and topics, and I love those kind of stories. So I feel like it's a great place to find interesting guests.
Well, and you have quite the diverse mix of guests and topics. Reena's podcast, again, is the Better Call Daddy podcast. It's a good segue to talking about that. One thing I've loved about doing this podcast compared to other ones I've done, the other podcasts I've done have been pretty niche and pretty focused professionally. So this podcast really opens up basically anybody from any profession who can come up with a favorite mistake story. So that's been really, really, really fun. Oh, it's fun.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
That's really, like good lessons for people. And I feel like too, in all of these personal journey kind of stories, there's lessons in all of that. It can be entertaining. Yes. It can be sad. It can be weird. It can be funny. I love that. And I'm having conversations with my daddy that I have never had.
Yeah. So I want to tell us the backstory of where you got the idea for the podcast, and did it ever feel like a mistake to start doing this with your dad?
There have been a few topics that I'm like, maybe I shouldn't cover for, the whole cancel culture type of reasons. But, you're like worried he might say something that will offend someone, but that's just because of, where he's from or experiences he's had or not being PC or,
Because how old is your dad?
He's 64.
Oh, okay. So it's not too old, but still, there's generational differences.
Definitely. And he's not hip to everything, but he's learning a lot. So the idea for the podcast really came with, my entrepreneurial journey. It was like I kept calling my dad for questions about like, what do you do when a client says the check's in the mail? What do you do when you need to outsource something? What do you do when you need to raise your price? What do you do when you have a difficult client? Like I was calling my dad. My dad ran a company with his parents for 45 years. He managed over 200 people. I feel like he's really good with people, and he's been a really good dad, and he has good relationship advice. And there's not a whole lot that I can't share with my dad. And so I was like, let me share that wisdom with the world. So that was really the first idea. And one mistake I made was having my dad on during the original interview. So I've decided now to just interview the guests, cut down the segment to what it's going to be, then share the story with my dad, then record his reaction, the two of us, and then record the intro. So that is the formula.
Did you have to talk your dad into doing it? How tough of a sell was that? Or was he enthusiastic?
My dad is like, he's a ham. He has always wanted me to create my own show. And now there's technology where it's easy enough for us to do it. But I had to send my dad some earbuds. I probably should get him a mic and upgrade. I had to walk him through how to get on Zoom. That's why I do Zoom. It's easy.
Yeah.
And also another thing in the beginning, kind of what we were going back to is, I wanted to get better at my interviewing skills. I wanted to get better at my writing skills. I wanted to get better at booking awesome story skills. And in the beginning, I was interrupting people. I was talking on top of people. So I was having to, I guess I didn't have to, but I was re-recording a lot of sound bites.
Yeah. Just to clean that up. And looking back, and you're at it's 80 something episodes.
Friday is going to be recording. Episode 100.
All right. Congrats.
And I decided to mix things up a little bit, and we created a new intro outro. And I'm like, what better time than to start a season 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Reena, is there a favorite? And this is a tough question. It's like asking an author, do you have a favorite book, or an artist if they have a favorite song? Do you have a favorite episode, or is there one that's really stuck with you because it was funny or because it was really powerful or poignant?
One I have to say that was something I was very, very excited about was James Altucher, because I listened to him all summer long on Instagram Live, and he was doing these Instagram Lives with his wife, Robin, and I ended up interviewing him and her. And so that was really special to me because I've just felt like I learned so much from him. I've read his books. And if I didn't create this show, I never would have had that opportunity. So that one was like really meaningful.
Wow. And I'm feeling clueless, or it's a mistake on my part to not know who James is, or I don't maybe so, I mean, I'm asking because someone in the audience might not know, but I'll admit to it. But who is James? I'm embarrassed.
James Altucher. Oh my gosh. So yeah, he's a podcaster. He's a best-selling author. He was a blogger. He's a chess master, poker player, entrepreneur. He's like founded and sold multiple companies. He's made and lost millions of dollars.
Yeah.
You should definitely check him out.
Well, you've piqued my interest for one to go and listen to that episode and then go learn more about James. So thank you for that. So I learn a lot from my guests. So I appreciate that, Reena. All right. Well, our guest today has been Reena Friedman Watts. Her two podcasts, as we've been talking about here, the Better Call Daddy show. You can find that. Just search Better Call Daddy. You'll find Better Call Saul, but make sure you don't typo, like Better Call Daddy. Keep typing enough to find Better Call Daddy. See, with my podcast, the thing is people search, and depending on the platform, they might get the Sheryl Crow song, or they'll get My Favorite Murder. I'm like, nope, keep going.
That's really funny because there's another show called, I think, Call Her Daddy, and it's very racy subject matters, but mine shows up very close to her, which maybe I'll get some spillover because this is a very popular show. I'm like, oh, awesome. Thanks for anything that has daddy in the title, I think is good.
Or I should have come up with a name that sounded more like a murder podcast.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the key to podcast success.
Make no mistakes.
I think But Reena, I think you've done really well with your podcast, and then also encourage people to check out the new podcast she's promoting, the Sniff Spotlight, as we continue celebrating healthcare heroes as we see the light at the end of the pandemic here. Again, Reena Friedman Watts. That's my most recent mistake. I'm going to go have something to drink now at the end of the day that's not water.
Are you drinking a gallon a day?
No, that's a mistake I'm making. I should keep up with that. So, health coach Reena. No, I'm kidding. Reena Friedman Watts. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for sharing your stories and your reflections and your lessons. This has been great. Thanks.
Thank you so much.